So much can happen within a split second when you've got a pair of skilled fighters together in the squared circle. And today, we're going to focus on the punches that rock the sport of boxing to its very core. Muhammad Ali's Phantom Punch. Was it just blindingly quick? Or was there something more nefarious at work? Well, when it comes to the story of Muhammad Ali's rematch against the former heavyweight champion Sonny Liston, the impression you get depends entirely on who you ask. After shocking the world by beating the heavily favored Liston in their first matchup, Ali was finally receiving the respect he clearly deserved by the time he was set to take on his rival for the second time. Liston, who had already enjoyed huge success at the top of the divisional pile, was still expected to be a very tough outing for anyone. However, when fight night came around, fans were left completely shocked when a seemingly insignificant counterpunch from the champ caused Liston to fall flat on his face. Now, these days, slow-motion replays would show the momentum of Liston being used against him by Ali as he fired back with a short countershot. But at the time, the finish became known as the Phantom Punch, a victory in Ali's resume that many ascribe to Sonny Liston's suspected ties to organized crime. Even the champion himself later said that while it was a good punch, he didn't think it was enough to keep a boxer of Liston's stature down like that. Liston himself, of course, denied it completely, claiming that he had in fact, been caught by a perfect punch. All in all, this hugely controversial stoppage was one of the biggest talking points of the 1960s, and to this day a subject of much conversation and debate amongst the sport's fans. Sugar Ray Robinson's perfect punch. What better way to begin than with a masterful knockout from one of the greatest fighters to ever lace up gloves, Sugar Ray Robinson. Not only was this perfectly executed left hook an incredible piece of boxing mechanics in motion, but this win came after Robinson's best years in the sport, after his long period of dominance in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Now an aging veteran, Sugar Ray, as a 35-year-old, had just lost his belts to the infamously tough Gene Fullmer, a man whose legendary ability to take a punch had helped him to a victory on the scorecards in 1957. Robinson for the entirety of the bout, eating his best shots while dishing out some serious punishment of his own. On that night, a new champ was crowned, and the win was seen as a major upset. So when the rematch was announced a few months later, the general public had seemingly learned their lesson, making Fullmer the betting favorite going in by a considerable margin. But Sugar Ray Robinson had also learned something, noticing that his rival had a susceptibility to the left hook. Taking this on board, and after a fairly competitive and even opening 4 rounds, Robinson unloaded the perfect punch, a textbook left hook that instantly cracked the famously hard-chinned Fullmer. Boxing pundits instantly declared it to be the greatest punch ever thrown. And after losing his belts on 3 different occasions, Sugar Ray Robinson had managed to win them back one last time, making him a 4-time champion of the world. George Foreman reclaims gold. George Foreman's famous defeat at the hands of Muhammad Ali in Zaire could have been the end of him, could have been something that crippled his legacy, leaving him stuck as a chapter in someone else's tale. The Rumble in the Jungle was a sporting event that overshadowed all others, a cultural event of massive proportions that served to elevate Ali's own stature to another level entirely. Big George took a 2-year hiatus from the sport directly after that embarrassing defeat, returning for just 6 fights before retiring for 10 years, exiting the world of boxing at the young age of 28. After having what he himself described as a religious epiphany, Foreman spent years as an ordained Christian minister, before eventually announcing his comeback in 1987. After a decade out of the ring, at the grand old age of 38, one of the biggest boxing icons of the 1970s made his return with 5 straight knockouts in 1 year, winning his next 24 fights before eventually losing out to a prime Evander Holyfield in 1991. And though at 42 that could have spelled the end for his time as a professional boxer, Foreman would not be denied his one final moment of glory. After a second defeat, this time at the hands of Tommy Morrison, the 45-year-old Foreman received his last attempt at World Championship glory, facing Michael Moorer for the IBF and the very same WBA title that he had lost to Ali all those years ago, 20 years to be exact. With the betting odds completely ruling him out and the young younger, more athletic Moorer in front of him, the opening 9 rounds of the fight went exactly as you might expect, with the champion easily outboxing this once great veteran, making the bout more of an exhibition of his own prowess than anything else. However, when the 10th round came around, despite failing to pull the trigger with any real success up until that point, Foreman managed to pull the win out of nowhere, connecting hard on Moorer's chin to rapturous applause, as the boxing world realized they had just witnessed the impossible. Seriously, this was as unlikely a career comeback as the sport has ever known. Muhammad Ali knocks out George Foreman. Unfortunately, as much as we'd like to sit here continuing singing the praises of George Foreman and his incredible late career comeback, this final entry is one that saw him left thoroughly embarrassed. At the age of 24, Foreman found his way to the WBA heavyweight title after racking up huge knockout wins over Joe Frazier and Ken Norton. All of a sudden, there was a new hungry contender in the weight class, one who brought a level of power and athleticism to the table that was unrivaled. So, when the 32-year-old Muhammad Ali was scheduled to take on the champ, in the hopes of winning back his title, it was easy to see why he was the betting underdog. Though still a formidable force, Ali was no longer the lightning-quick, fleet-of-foot pugilist that once took the division by storm. No, this was an older Muhammad Ali, one who was expected to lose in brutal fashion to this fresh new member of the elite upper echelon of boxing. But the man who famously called himself the greatest had other plans. Instead of fighting Foreman head-on, Ali opted to sit back on the ropes, utilizing what we now know as the rope-a-dope to tire out Big George. Despite that sounding like a truly ridiculous way to win a fight, this bizarre tactic worked a treat. And by the middling rounds, Foreman was a shell of himself. Ali clearly knew what he was doing, taunting his opponent all the while, before, in the 8th round, eventually springing out of his defensive shell to score the knockout. It was an upset for the ages, and a win that only served to elevate Muhammad Ali's already stellar legacy to another level entirely. And as the newly crowned champ stood there post-fight telling the world that they should have seen this coming, all of his detractors were left completely awestruck, unable to argue against the indisputable greatness of this man. Buster Douglas shocks the world. During the prime years of the former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson, he brought an intimidating aura to the table that simply didn't have an equal within the sport of boxing. A fearsome knockout artist indeed. But when it came to Iron Mike, a lot of the time, he had beaten his opponents before they had even entered the ring. To put it simply, the man was a terrifying presence. And when the champ was scheduled to take on virtually unknown contender James Buster Douglas in 1990, fans of the sport had no reason to believe that we were about to see anything other than a quick, vicious finish. The odds of him winning were so long that many casinos in Vegas refused to accept bets on the fight, calling the matchup such a concrete, foregone conclusion that it would be pointless to do so. However, what we didn't understand at this point in time was that Buster Douglas had some added motivation to get the win. After his mother passed away just 23 days out from the fight, a fire awoke within the contender, causing him to gain a sense of self-belief that simply didn't make sense under the circumstances. And when fight night came around, he was able to shock the world early, dominating proceedings at first, jabbing at the champ with relative ease, causing him to miss his best punches. Tyson, who was clearly overconfident, hadn't expected to find himself in a fight, and as a result, was found to have undertrained, eventually finding that his eye had swollen shut by the time the 5th round was through. His corner, who were just as confident as their fighter, hadn't even brought an ice bucket or end swell with them to the bout. And though Tyson was able to score a knockdown in the 8th round, Douglas just about beat the count to return with a flurry in the 9th. When round number 10 came around, Douglas once again turned up the heat on his adversary, finishing the fight with a huge combination that sent Iron Mike to the canvas. It was instantly declared the most unlikely upset in boxing history, and, depending on who you ask, has been called the most incredible underdog win in sports, period.